For joining Jennifer Schaus and Associates in our 2019 Webinar Wednesday series. We're coming to you live from downtown Washington, D.C. Our webinars are every Wednesday, and you can find the upcoming schedule on our website. Past webinars and all recordings are also on our website and on our YouTube channel, along with over 160 other recordings on federal contracting topics. All are complimentary. If you have questions for our speaker today, you can email him directly to the contact information you'll see on the last slide. This is just a little bit about us. We are Washington, D.C. based service and provide services for federal contractors. This ranges from market analysis support to proposal writing and also post-award compliance. More information is on our website, so please visit us there. These are a couple upcoming events that you can find more information here, also on our website. We do offer advertising in our newsletter, so you can email us if you would like more information on that. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Our speaker today is Ryan Bradle, and he's going to be covering service-disabled, veteran-owned small business contracting, advantages in contracting. Thank you, Ryan, for joining us, and I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. I'm very happy to be here discussing service-disabled, veteran-owned small businesses. In the last webinar that I just did, I'm doing one in a series of 3 webinars today on SDVO SB companies. The last webinar we discussed the requirements to be a service-disabled, veteran-owned small business. This session, we're going to talk about the benefits of being a service-disabled, veteran-owned small business. You know, why would a company want to be a service-disabled, veteran-owned small business? So that's the focus here. Next slide, please. Can I get the next slide? All right, here we go. Going to be 4 high-level topics that we're going to cover. That goes over the 4 core advantages and benefits of contracting as a service-disabled, veteran-owned small business, which I'll refer to as an SDVO SB. The first, of course, are set-aside contracts. The second is the Vets First program at the VA, very beneficial program for SDVO SBs. Third, we're going to talk about sole source awards, and then fourth, we'll talk about subcontracts. Being an SDVO SB can be a great benefit for being a government subcontractor and helping primes fill their subcontracting plan. So next slide. So first, what is a set-aside contract? This might seem very basic, very obvious. Most people know what set-aside contracts are, but I want to make sure we cover all of our bases and make sure we're operating from the same understandings. So what is a set-aside? Well, a set-aside is a contract that is set aside for competition only among companies that fall into certain small business program categories. So, of course, service-disabled, veteran-owned small businesses, 8As, hub zone, women-owned small business. These are categories, different socioeconomic small business programs. And the government agencies, contracting officers, can set aside certain contracts only for competition amongst businesses that fall into one of these categories. So, of course, an SDVO SB set aside, you would have to be a service-disabled, veteran-owned small business to compete for an SDVO SB set aside. All right, that's pretty basic, but wanted to make sure we covered it. The reason behind the set-asides is that they're part of the government's effort to meet its small business contracting goals. So according to statute, the government is supposed to spend at least 23% of its total contracting dollars on small businesses. That's all small businesses. But that's a big chunk of money. That was $120.8 billion in fiscal year 2018. For service-disabled, veteran-owned small businesses, SDVO SBs, by statute, the government is supposed to spend 3% of its total contracting dollars with SDVO SBs. That was $20.6 billion in 2018. So very large chunk of money. It's a big opportunity. There's a lot of money out there for SDVO SPs. And the set-aside program is one of the key ways in which the government hits those goals. All right, next slide. So how do set-asides work? The basic set-aside rule is called the rule of two. And there's two basic elements to the rule of two. And you'll see why it's called the rule of two in just a minute. The first element is for simplified acquisitions. So any contract, any acquisition that is it's valued between $3,500 and $150,000 is automatically set aside for small business unless the contracting officer determines that there is not a reasonable expectation of obtaining offers from, it should be offers, not officers. That's a typo there, my fault, but obtaining offers from two or more small businesses. The government is very interested in competition. Competition is critical. So there's a presumption that these small contracts, these contracts under $150,000, will be set aside for some sort of small business. But if the contracting officer does his or her market research and determines that there aren't at least two small businesses out there who can do the work, well, then it does not need to be set aside for a small business in that case. All other acquisitions, for acquisitions above the $150,000 threshold, the same basic rule still applies. There's not the presumption that it'll be set aside for small businesses once it's above this threshold, but the contracting officer is still required to do market research and look and see, are there any small businesses out there that can do this work? And if the contracting officer, in doing his market research or her market research, finds out that there are two or more small businesses that can do the work, then in that case, the contracting officer must set the contract aside for competition among small businesses. Now, so the question becomes, all right, so what how does the contracting officer determine whether to set it aside for a service sale veteran-owned company, a hub zone company, a woman-owned small business, 8A? The rule is that the contracting officer has to set it aside for one of the socioeconomic small businesses. So that would be SDVO SB, 8A, WSB, hub zone. Those have priority over just regular small businesses. So you have to set it aside for the socioeconomic small businesses first. Now, among which socioeconomic program, at that point, it's totally up to the contracting officer's discretion. As I said before, not only every agency, but every sub-agency in the government has its own small business goals for each of these programs. And so, if more than one socioeconomic program might qualify, for example, if there's, two or more WOSBs and at the same time two or more SDVO SBs who could potentially perform the work, well, the contracting officer is just going to decide which one he or she wants to do based on whether the agency is close to its goal for that socioeconomic program. But the rule of two refers to the fact that two or more small businesses must be able to compete for the contract in order for it to be set aside. Very important rule. All right, next slide. It looks like that's a duplicate of that last one. So next slide. All right. And this is just elaborating on a point that I just made, which is that, in making the determination to set aside an acquisition for small business, the contracting officer will rely on input from the agency's small business representative. It's usually called an OSDBU, and the SBA. So a lot of times, small business capabilities are flying under the radar. When the contracting officer is doing his or her market research and trying to understand the industry and trying to understand what companies are out there that might be able to meet the government's needs, a lot of times small businesses are flying under the radar and they don't immediately come to the contracting officer's attention. So that being the case, it's really important for a small business to advocate for itself and to let the government know, hey, we can do this work, and we're a small business, or we're an SDVOSB, and so we can help you meet your contracting goals. And the way to do that is, you need to do your own research and understand which government agencies are likely to have a need for your services. And then, you go to that agency, go to the OSDBU or go to the SBA and say, listen, we can perform this work. We can perform it well. And, we're small, we're service-disabled veterans, so we might not be on your radar, but we want to let you know that we can do this work. So in order to get set-aside contracts, part of the process is the small business letting the government know that it's out there. Next slide. Looks like this one's a duplicate again, so next slide. Sorry about that. All right, so we talked about set-aside contracts. The next major topic that we want to cover is the Veterans First program at the VA. It was established under the Veterans Benefit Act of 2006. This law provides the VA with unique procurement authority to set aside contracts for and sole source contracts to SDVOSBs. The basic rule here is that at the VA, so this is the VA only, if there are two or more service-disabled veteran-owned small businesses, or if not service-disabled veteran-owned small businesses, two regular veteran-owned, so a non-disabled veteran-owned small business. If there's two or more that are capable of doing the work, then the VA has to set it aside for SDVOSBs. So at the VA, SDVOSBs and VOSBs take priority over any other socioeconomic program. So basically at the VA, SDVOSBs get the first cut at any contracts before, HUBZone, women-owned small business, etc. So it's a very important benefit for veterans at the VA. Next slide. Now, when the law was initially passed, there was a lot of controversy and a lot of question marks about what exactly the rule of two meant. And so initially, the VA took the position that it had to set aside a procurement for SDVOSBs if it was just a regular procurement, but that it could go and procure off the GSA schedule without regard for the rule of two. And this was a big controversy for a few years. It brewed for a while. There's a lot of litigation in the courts. But ultimately, the Supreme Court decided in a case known as Kingdomware. Kingdomware was the SDVOSB that sued the government in this case. The Supreme Court held that they interpreted the Veterans Benefits Act to mean that the rule of two holds priority over all other contracting methods. It's an absolute priority. So this means that, for example, the VA cannot go and procure its needs off of the GSA schedule without first conducting the rule of two analysis and saying, are there two or more SDVOSBs that can do this work? If the answer to that is no, if they do the market research and there aren't two or more, then they can go to the GSA schedule, but they can't use the GSA schedule to get around the rule of two. Another important case, very recent, just a few months ago, the GAO held that the rule of two applied even to other agencies who were procuring goods or services for the VA. So in this Veterans for You case, it involved the government printing office. They were printing sort of mental health brochures for veterans that were going to be placed in VA hospitals. The GAO determined that was fundamentally a VA requirement, even though the government printing office was procuring the work. And so the rule of two applied in that case. All right, next slide. And I just want to say, on those points, it's important to understand what the rule is, because we have a lot of cases. I have a lot of clients call me and saying, like, look, the VA put out this requirement, and I don't think they did a rule of two analysis in advance. And at that point, we would protest that requirement. So the reason we're covering this is to understand what your rights are as a service-disabled veteran-owned small business, and making sure that you're calling the government to account and making sure that it's giving you those rights. All right, so the third main topic that we're going to cover are sole source awards. And this, we're beyond talking about the VA, and we're back to talking about all agencies. But under the law, the contracting officer, this applies for small contracts. So this is for contracts that have a total value, including all option years, of under $4 million. So typical contract has 5 option years. We're looking at contracts that are under $1 million a year. But for those types of contracts that are under $1 million a year, the contracting officer shall consider a sole source award. And a sole source award is an award awarded without competition. It's a direct award to a company that can do the work. And so the law says that the agency must consider a sole source award to an SDVOSB before it considers any other contracting methods. So before it looks at set aside or a GSA schedule or anything else, it has to look at doing a sole source to an SDVOSB if it finds that there's an SDVOSB out there that can do the work, and that an award can be made at a fair and reasonable price, and that the total amount of the award will be under $4 million. And then the final requirement there is that the work can't be currently performed by an 8A company. So you can't take the work away from an 8A. But otherwise, for these small contracts, the government is required to look at sole sourcing them to SDVOSBs. All right, next slide. And there's an important possible development coming down the pike for this sole source program. This year, the House of Representatives passed a law that would increase the size of contracts eligible for sole source awards just by eliminating that, including options language for the rule. So instead of $4 million for the total value of the contract, including options, it would just be $4 million for the base year. So that's a massive increase in the value of contracts that would be available for this sole source program. It passed the House 415 to 6, so overwhelming support, but so far has not no word on if the Senate is going to take it up. But it's important to keep this on your radar because this could be a huge boon for veteran-owned companies. The possibility that of increasing the ability to sole source to veteran-owned companies. Next slide, please. So, all this is well and good, but the question then becomes, how do I get a sole source award? So, as we were talking about before, it's really important to advocate for yourself. So, the first thing is make sure your customers or your potential customers know your status and they can make sole source awards to you. There's a lot of times where we have agencies that, they know that there's a particular good or service that they need, but the contracting officer is not fully cognizant of all of the avenues, all the vehicles of obtaining that service or fulfilling that need that are available. And so it's important to let, if you have an agency or a customer that you really want to work with, it's important to let them know that they are able to sole source a contract award to you if the requirements are met. So that's point number one. The other important point is that the agencies do a lot of market research before making sole source awards, and that market research, in a lot of cases, is formal. They'll put on an RFI, so it's really important to respond to all RFIs. And when you respond, when you respond to the RFIs, letting the government know your capabilities. It's also important to let them know your SDVOSB status and let them know that you are eligible for a sole source award. If they want to go that route. And then, the final thing is just, the good old fashioned, sort of soft marketing, soft business development. So, as opposed to responding to RFIs. Just networking with agency purchasers and knowing the personalities involved and understanding what the agency's needs are, so that you can tailor your capabilities to the agency's needs. These are 3 really important steps for getting sole source awards. Next slide. And then the last point that I want to make here, the last big category that we want to cover, and I'll be brief here because we're running low on time. But the point is that large prime contractors have to submit a small business plan, a small business subcontracting plan when they get a large contract. And they are required to do their own market research and subcontract to small businesses to the maximum extent practicable. And they have to submit a plan to the government contracting officer saying, this is who we're going to subcontract to. And they're required to have a good mix of, SDVO SBs, hub zones, 8As, and they're required to do market research to find the SDVO SBs and the 8As out there that can do the work. And if the government doesn't like their plan and thinks that they're not putting out enough effort to subcontract to small businesses, they'll send them back to rework the plan. So the important point here is that a lot of times large prime contractors can be just as important to customers as the government, and there's a lot of opportunities there. But the rule is the same, or the advice is the same as with the government, that you have to let them know that you're out there, and you have to make contact with the large primes and let them know, hey, I'm an SDVO SB. I can help you meet your small business subcontracting goals, and I can do really good work. Next slide. So that winds up our session on the benefits of being a service-able veteran-owned small business. Went over a lot of different avenues by which SDVO SBs can get contracts and can get work. And I'm happy to field any further questions by email or telephone. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ryan, for sharing your knowledge and insight today. Today's presentation has been recorded and can be found on our website or YouTube channel within about 48 hours. If you have questions about today's topic, please contact Ryan at the phone number or email shown on your screen. Thank you, everybody. This concludes the webinar.